Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the forgotten corners of a royal court, where velvet skirts brush polished floors and secrets travel faster than footsteps. You're in a moonlit hallway, quiet as snowfall, padded with woven tapestries depicting long-dead monarchs and triumphs no one really remembers anymore. And just ahead, beyond the gently arching door, lies the private world of the ladies-in-waiting, a place where a single glance could ruin a marriage, and laughter could mean loyalty or betrayal. You're entering a space very few were ever allowed into, where the politics weren't made of swords and treaties, but of perfume, letters, fans, and whispered sighs. A world that wasn't on the map, but moved the world just the same. Of course, you probably won't survive this. Not because you'll be beheaded, although, historically not impossible, but because if the boredom doesn't lull you to sleep, the velvet curtain secrets will wrap around you like a lullaby. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how many different places we all fall asleep together from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tread softly along the cold stones, each step echoing into thick silence. A light draft stirs your sleeve. On your left, a heavy red velvet curtain stirs slightly. Was that a breeze? Or did someone just duck behind it? You don't check. This isn't your home. It never was. You're a ghost here, drifting through what remains of power once worn like perfume. The hallway you're in isn't even supposed to exist. It was built between wings, an afterthought corridor squeezed between the Queen's audience room and the chambers of her closest companions. The official blueprints don't mention it, but it's there. A velveted artery in the body of a palace, pulsing with tension. The floors are unusually soft here, not because of any carpeting, but because of wear. Thousands of soft, slippered steps have smoothed the stones down over centuries. It's almost eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's been carefully curated, maintained by generations of women who needed their secrets to remain unspoken. That first door you approach is low and curved like a cat's arching back. It creaks, because of course it does. And on the other side, a sitting room dimly lit by candle sconces and low-burning hearts. It's empty, at least now, but you can feel it. The perfume still hangs in the air, as though someone only just left. The ladies-in-waiting, sometimes 5, sometimes 12, depending on the Queen and the century, weren't just assistants. They were confidantes, decoys, spies, stylists, playmates, and sometimes unwilling pawns. The term itself sounds passive waiting, but make no mistake, these women moved kingdoms by whispering in the right ears. One of the most famous of these was Embroidered, a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth I, and wasn't just known for her poetry and chant. She was infamous for bearing a child by the Earl of Oxford. The scandal, only that it landed both her and the Earl in the Tower of London for a bit. Nothing says bad date like prison time. The hallway you're still strolling through, it probably saw worse. There are rumors, of course there are, that this was the hall where a coded language of knocks was invented. 3 soft taps on a panel meant the coast was clear. 2 meant stop, 1 meant run. Not from soldiers, from secrets. Historians still argue whether this exact space ever served a formal purpose. Some believe it was simply a servant's passage, hidden behind the elegance to keep the machinery of nobility moving unseen. Others suggest it was deliberately built by a paranoid queen who wanted a way to spy on her ladies without ever being seen herself. You pass a mirror. Well, what used to be one. Now it's a dulled oval of silvered glass, cloudy at the edges. It reflects your shape, but not your eyes. That's appropriate. In this world, seeing too much could get you into trouble. The mirror, maybe it learned not to see at all. Another whisper skims past your ear. Or maybe it's the draft again. The heavy velvet curtains sway once more. You notice a panel in the wall slightly ajar, behind which sits a tiny, velvet-padded bench. A listening nook, no bigger than a wardrobe. It was meant for eavesdropping. Maybe you're the one being listened to now. You pause, letting your fingertips graze the faded wall tapestry beside you once gold, now more the color of old honey. It shows a scene of courtly dancing, frozen in time. A lady bows, her hair in ribbons, her eyes locked on a masked man. There's no artist's signature. No one signed these things. Women didn't get credit. Remember, beneath your feet, the soft click of your shoe gives way to silence. You've reached a part of the hallway where even the floor knows to hush. At the far end, another door, and behind it, a faint scent. Not must or mildew, but rosewater, lemon balm, and cloves. The secret recipe of a vanished woman. A scent worn like armor, passed down quietly between friends and rivals, until one day it wasn't. Welcome, at last, to the forgotten hall where ladies in waiting whispered secrets. You've only just arrived, and oh, there's so much left to hear. You're still in the hallway, but now you slip gently through that next doorway, the one heavy with scent and silence. It opens into a chamber that's half salon, half strategy room. No throne, no banners, just low tables, carved from pale oak, ranged in careful semicircles, like the petals of a daisy. This is where the ladies in waiting sat, not to rule, but to influence. And influence, as you're beginning to sense, was far more dangerous than power. Here's the trick no one tells you. The most important political decisions of the day weren't always made in the council chamber or during the king's hunt. Sometimes they started here, in the curve of a smile, in the flick of a lace sleeve, or in the sweet-smelling pouch passed hand to hand. You wander among these little tables, pausing by one with an open sachet. Inside, lavender buds, crushed rosemary, dried lemon peel, and something spicy cloves, maybe, or no. At first glance, just a blend for perfume, right? Wrong. Ladies in waiting often used scented pouches not just for fragrance, but for coded communication. A certain blend might signal affection. Another could warn of danger. There was even a banishment blend, strong with camphor and wormwood, sent as a message. Your favor is fading. Harsh, but elegant. This was perfume's politics. Not so different from modern office emails, except with more lilac and fewer exclamation marks. You pause beside a low bench, embroidered with a heraldic line you half recognize. Someone once sat here, kneading a tiny muslin sachet in her palm as she considered which ingredients to tuck inside and which truths to withhold. A single petal could be a threat. A stem of thyme might mean loyalty. Honestly, it makes emojis look downright primitive. You pick up a parchment tucked beneath the bench. The ink has faded to a sleepy brown, and the script is delicate, serpentine. The recipe, or so it appears: violet oil, rose water, vinegar for thieves, and then add only in private, never when washed. Intriguing. Historians still argue whether these perfume recipes were used purely for a scent or doubled as medicinal formulas or something darker. Poison, perhaps. Memory triggers. Definitely. Every court had its share of amateur apothecaries among the ladies. Some were encouraged. Others were, shall we say, burned. You settle onto a bench near the fire, which crackles with a little leftover warmth. This room wasn't just for idle chatting. It was a chamber of whispers. Ladies in waiting were often the first to know if the queen was unwell, or if her husband hadn't visited her room in weeks. And the moment that knowledge left their mouths, even in the form of a sigh, became currency. Perfumed politics was a risky trade. Consider Diane de Poitiers, mistress to King Henry II of France. She was technically a lady-in-waiting. The waiting is doing a lot of work in that title. She wore black and white exclusively, bathed in gold-infused water, yes, actual gold, and managed to stay in power for over 20 years. Some say it was charm, others say it was arsenic. You move to a small writing desk in the corner. There's a glass inkwell, a goose feather quill, and what might be powdered iris root in a tiny jar. The desk drawer is slightly ajar. You peek inside because of course you do. A bundle of thin paper strips tied in a braid of hair. Oof. That's not eerie at all. Hair was often used to seal messages or perfume sachets. It added a layer of intimacy and made it easier to identify who sent what. You guess that was useful when the court was teetering between alliance and disaster, which, let's be honest, was most of the time. Outside this chamber, in the grand ballroom or the throne hall, men in tights argued about borders and taxes. But in here, between rose petals and clove buds, women traded in something slippery, a rumor. And rumor, if you timed it right, could rewrite a nation. You lean closer to the jar of iris powder. Iris was a common perfume base, but some believed it had protective properties, especially against jealousy. Whether that was chemical or cosmic was anyone's guess. But hey, when you're in a room full of ambitious women vying for royal favor, you'd want all the help you could get. There's a faded cushion in the corner of the chamber, pressed nearly flat. Someone sat there often. Maybe it was the quiet one. There's always a quiet one who pretended to embroider but was really listening. She remembered everything, spoke little, and when she finally did open her mouth, the queen listened. Because here's another secret. Queens often trusted their ladies-in-waiting more than their husbands. Sometimes that was personal, sometimes it was practical, and sometimes it was because the lady knew too much. You turned back toward the sachet. You first noticed the one still faintly scented with lavender and lemon. It's old now, the contents crushed into a fine powder at the corners. But once, this pouch held more than fragrance. It held a message, maybe forgiveness, maybe a warning. You tuck it back where you found it. Just as you rise, the candle flickers. Someone was here. Maybe recently, maybe centuries ago. Either way, their scent still lingers. You press slightly on the next door, and it opens inward with a whisper of wood on stone. This room is dark and no hearth. No candles still burning. Only the moon, slicing through a narrow window high above, casts enough light to make out the silhouette of a wardrobe. But calling it a wardrobe is a kindness. It's really a small fortress, oak, iron-banded, with hinges that creak like secrets trying to escape. You know without asking, this isn't just a place for storing gowns and slippers. This was a vault for a carefully folded danger. In the world of ladies-in-waiting, closets didn't just hold cassettes. They held letters, locks of hair, stolen trinkets, and sometimes other people. Think that sounds dramatic? Ask Margaret of Anjou, wife to Henry VI of England. A lady-in-waiting once hid a court scribe in a laundry cupboard for 6 days. 6 days, just to get intel on who was sleeping with whom, and whether the French envoy had brought actual peace offerings or just really expensive cheese. Historians still argue whether Margaret knew about the scribe, but let's be honest, she definitely knew. You approach the wardrobe slowly, half expecting it to yawn open and reveal a chorus line of conspirators. But no, it's just full of dresses now, pale ghosts of silk and velvet. Some still smell faintly of rose, others, oddly, of ink. You imagine the scene, a lady sitting at her vanity, pinning her hair, chatting sweetly about the weather while her friend, crouched inside this closet, listens for footsteps or raised voices. Corset conspiracies weren't all whispers and sachets. Sometimes they were breathless, sweating in a linen cupboard, waiting for just the right moment to emerge with a letter, a name, or a lie. You glance toward the vanity in the corner. The mirror's cracked into places. You stare into it, but it gives nothing back. That's fine. Reflection wasn't really a virtue here. Ladies-in-waiting had to be more than pretty. They had to be pliable, but not too pliable. Ambitious, but not threatening. Loyal, but only to the right person. It was a delicate dance, performed in tight shoes and tighter bodices. And closets weren't always voluntary. Some women were hidden in them against their will. Take Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII. When rumors of her past indiscretions emerged, she was placed under house arrest and guarded by her own ladies-in-waiting, some of whom were tasked with spying on her, recording every word she said. The betrayal, it came from her wardrobe. A servant found a love letter tucked into a gown. That letter helped seal her fate. You run your hand along the wardrobe's inside panel. It's smooth, worn. A finger-width groove in the wood suggests a compartment. You press gently. Nothing happens. Of course not, this isn't a mystery novel. But that doesn't mean it didn't open. Once, back in the hallway beyond, the silence hums. You listen. No one comes, but the air feels thick. Like something just passed through laughter, maybe. Or a memory. You kneel beside the wardrobe and find a small shoe. Just one. Dainty, beaded, likely lost during a hurried exit or tossed aside during a very different kind of drama. Shoes were often left behind in historical court records. Strangely enough, they were symbols of departure, escape, even disgrace. There's a French folk tale that claims a lady's soul lingers in her last pair of shoes. You decide not to put this one on, just in case. On the wall behind you, another tapestry. This one shows a hunter lady with a hawk, watching the men chase stags while she smiles with quiet smugness. You'd smile too, if you knew the real decisions weren't happening in the forest, but right here, between laces and linen. Ladies-in-waiting were expected to be decorative, yes, but also discreet, especially when it came to secrets stored in wardrobes. One Austrian court etiquette guide from the 1700s included an entire chapter on folded obedience. That's a real phrase. Basically, it meant you should fold linens, keep your mouth shut, and only betray someone if absolutely necessary, which, in court life, was about 3 times a week. You rise, brushing dust from your knees. Behind the wardrobe, the wall is scuffed. Maybe something heavy used to lean here. A chest, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, a woman used to lean here, listening, heart racing, as footsteps passed outside. You wonder how many confessions this room has heard. How many schemes were born between the hems of gowns. It wasn't just a dressing room, it was a pressure cooker. This could cut deeper than steel here. A soft thump, you freeze, but it's just a slipper falling from a shelf. Still, your pulse quickens. That's the thing about courtly secrets. Even the air seems to remember them. You turn back to the doorway and pause. Something about the wardrobe still lingers in your mind. That sense of layered hiding, not just people hiding objects, but people hiding themselves. Their ambitions, their fears, their loyalties. And behind that, another thought, quieter. How many women kept silent because they had no safe place to speak? You leave the room quietly, as though to avoid waking it. The wardrobe creaks shut behind you. The next room you slip into smells faintly of beeswax and something sharp ink. Maybe. Or the slow decay of parchment. Sunlight filters through high-stained glass slits, casting jewel-toned streaks across a circular table at the center of the chamber. Round it, high-backed chairs with needlework cushions arranged in a loose circle, each one pulled slightly askew, as if their owners had just stepped out or fled. You've wandered into an embroidery room, but this was never just about stitching flowers onto handkerchiefs. Oh no, here, between the threads and frames, the women of the court played a more dangerous game. A game of needle and nerve. You approach one of the chairs and sit, careful not to disturb the half-finished work still stretched across the frame. A red silken thread snakes through the pale fabric, forming the outline of a rose, or is it a fire? Hard to say. Maybe it was meant to be both. Ladies-in-waiting spend hours here, ostensibly stitching to pass the time. But time, at court, was never just passed, it was maneuvered. These embroidery circles weren't just for gossip. They were laboratories for a coded language, test beds for loyalty, and sometimes quiet rooms for shaping the downfall of a rival. And if you think that sounds dramatic, you haven't read enough footnotes. Historians still argue whether Queen Isabella of Castell's inner circle used stitch codes to exchange messages during the Inquisition. One fringe theory suggests that a particular rose motif, 7 petals, no leaves, was a sign of silent dissent. That's the kind of petty rebellion we love to whisper about. History may not agree, but the embroidery certainly doesn't deny it. You lean forward and study another frame. This one depicts a pair of birds with oddly intense expressions. Could be doves, could be spies. You wouldn't put it past them. Imagine this. 3 ladies bend over their frames, chatting about which duchess wore the worst gown to last week's feast. But beneath that, one flicks her needle in a particular rhythm. Tap, pull, tap again. The other responds, not with words, but with a cough, a glance, a pause in her stitching. Communication by motion. They couldn't write openly. Letters could be intercepted. But embroidery, who would suspect a daisy chain of anything treasonous? And yet, inside these harmless-looking patterns were sometimes embedded maps, names, or worse intent. And there was always one, always, that took the game too far. You run your fingers across a pin cushion shaped like a goose. Several pins arranged in a pattern that looks deliberate. Could just be the result of a fidgety hand. Or it could be a warning. You never really know with these women. Consider the case of Mary, Queen of Scots. While imprisoned in England, she famously passed coded letters using ciphered alphabets. But before that, rumors swirled that her ladies-in-waiting used embroidery threads, black and silver, specifically to track the moods of their queen, or even to indicate when it was safe to speak freely. No hard evidence, of course. Just whispers, embroidered into history. You rise and walk to the far corner, where a small shelf holds baskets of tangled threads. Someone's mess, long since abandoned. Among them, a folded kerchief with initials stitched in the tiniest thread imaginable. AG, or is it CG? Either way, you get the sense it was left in haste. Maybe the hands that made it were trembling. On the walls, frames display finished works. Birds again, a tower, a woman's face, serene, but her hands are clutched together in a way that seems anxious. You wonder how many personal sorrows were hidden behind these tranquil scenes. How many regrets were stitched with lavender thread while the others weren't watching. You touch a thimble on a nearby table. It's heavier than it looks. Silver, with a tiny crest etched into its side. You wonder if it once belonged to someone who used it to prick more than fabric. In one infamous story, a lady-in-waiting to Empress Matilda supposedly embedded a message inside a rolled ham saying simply, "He knows." No one knows who he was. Probably a king, possibly a lover, definitely someone who regretted it. Another chair, another embroidery frame. This one's unfinished. A unicorn, half-formed. Its horn only partially threaded. Someone stopped mid-stitch, needle still tucked into the cloth. Why, called away? Or perhaps the message had been delivered, and the rest didn't matter. You start to notice a rhythm to the room. The way the frames are arranged, the spacing between chairs. It feels intentional, like a ritual, or a trap. And all the while, your ears pick up on something subtle. A kind of echo, not quite sound, not quite memory. The ghost of soft laughter, maybe. Or the sigh of a woman who just realized her best friend betrayed her to the queen. Because here, betrayal didn't come with a knife. It came with silence. with a missed stitch, with the absence of a reply. A movement in the corner, just your shadow, most likely, or something else. The threads twitch ever so slightly in the breeze. You're not sure where it's coming from. Before you leave, you glance one last time at the embroidered fire rose. It burns quietly, no flames, just thread, but it still scorches. The hallway narrows now, a subtle squeeze between two ancient beams where the ceiling dips, and the stone floor shifts underfoot. You duck slightly as you pass through a crooked archway that's warped with age and probably with secrets. The scent in this room is unmistakable. Hot wax, parchment, and something faintly metallic. You're in the writing chamber. No, not the one with royal decrees and official ink stamps. This is the unofficial scriptorium of courtly women. The ladies in waiting used this chamber when they needed to say something they couldn't say loud, which, honestly, was most of the time. You take a few steps forward and see it. A long desk cluttered with quills, sheets of half-used parchment, sand bottles for drying, and most charming of all, a pair of carved ivory blotters shaped like small doves. Very sweet, very misleading. The truth is, many of these letters weren't romantic or poetic. They were warnings, deals, apologies that arrived too late or too early. And nearly all of them were laced with coded language. You didn't just write what you meant. You wrote what you wanted someone else to believe you meant, layered under wax seals and formal flourishes. You lift a folded note from the table. The wax seal is cracked, already broken. Long ago, but the impression still holds. It's a tree with no leaves. Unusual. You unfold it gently. The message is short. The gardener is weeping again. That's it. Is it a metaphor? A little observation? A threat? Historians still argue about letters like these, especially the ones that pop up in minor collections with no author name. Just initials and ambiguous prose. Some call them nonsense. Others suspect espionage. You know better. Nothing at court was nonsense. It just hadn't been translated yet. You run your fingers along the inside of the letter, half expecting invisible ink to rise beneath your touch. No such luck. But you do find something tucked into the desk drawer, a bundle of ribbons, each marked with a tiny ink dot. Morse code. Before Morse was even born. Maybe, or maybe just a color-coded flirting system gone horribly out of control. One ribbon, crimson, is frayed at the end, possibly snapped in anger, possibly torn during a secret handoff in a hallway not unlike the one you just came from. Consider the infamous scandal of Frances Howard, a noble woman in early 17th century England. Married at 14 to a man she hated, she later fell for another scandal on its own. But when her annulment became public drama, letters between her and her lover surfaced. Some were innocent, others not so much. One allegedly included a coded diagram of a poison recipe. And yes, she was eventually convicted of murder. Just goes to show, never underestimate a love note. You walk toward the small window at the edge of the room. The sill is scratched deeply, like someone sat here regularly, carving tiny notches or initials into the wood. You find a few. A plus SMH, a spiral, a broken heart with a crown above it. Was it longing, boredom, or just a moment of rebellion carved into royal real estate? The candle beside the desk is melted nearly flat, but beside it lies a small iron stylus, a tool not for writing, but for etching. Some letters weren't written in ink. They were scratched into ivory fans, or woven into embroidery, or even encoded into recipes, like the ones you saw earlier. You examine a slip of parchment tucked inside a hollowed-out book. Classic move. It's blank, except for a tiny watermark in the corner, a crescent moon pierced by an arrow. Definitely not a publishing logo. Possibly a signature. Nearby, a small tin box. Inside, sealing wax of different colors. Red for urgency, green for prosperity, black for a mourning, pink for a flirtation, at least according to the unofficial color guide of Queen Caroline's court. One historian tried to dismiss it as idle decoration. That historian has clearly never tried navigating palace intrigue while holding a candle and a crush. You pick up one last folded letter edges scorched, as if someone tried to burn it but couldn't quite commit. It reads, "Tell her I forgive her, but I will never forget the sound of the door closing." Oof. Chilling. You wonder who her was. A queen, a rival, a best friend. Sometimes they were all the same person. Outside, you hear the faint creak of the hallway again. Just the house settling, probably. You glance round the room one more time. Every surface here hums with intention. Nothing casual. Every pen stroke had a pulse behind it. Every seal cracked open a consequence. These weren't just letters, they were loaded weapons, tucked inside scented drawers and hope chests. And the women who wrote them, they smiled at feasts, laughed at banquets, and cried when no one was looking into handkerchiefs with ink-stained corners. You fold the letter back, set it down. Some words aren't meant to be answered, only remembered. The next door swings open with a hesitant groan, as though even it isn't sure whether you should be entering. You step into a long, narrow gallery. The walls are lined not with paintings, but with delicate shelves, and on each shelf sits an array of feathered fans, row after row of them. Ostrich, peacock, swan. Some fur-trimmed, some tipped with tiny gemstones. Tools of grace, yes, but more importantly, tools of strategy. This is the fan room, or at least, that's what you'd call it. The ladies in waiting didn't announce its name. That would have been far too obvious. Instead, this room lived in euphemisms, the feathers, the shelf walk, or, in one notably saucy case, the breeze corridor. You pick up one of the fans at random, a snowy white plume stitched with silver thread. Elegant, soft, but it was never just for cooling oneself or fending off unseemly odors in the hall. No, in this palace, a fan was a language. You wave it lightly, mimicking how a lady might have fluttered it at her cheek. Seems innocent enough, right? Wrong. If she'd flicked it open and held it to the left, she was signaling interest. Closed it slowly, rejection. Dropped it. Well, that was the social equivalent of a slap. Some historians call it fan flirtation, but that barely scratches the surface. These feathered tools were also used for warnings, threats, and sometimes shocking. I know even actual communication with other women. Courtly alliances could be forged in the subtle tilt of a wrist. You set the fan down and wander to a pair of velvet-covered stools beside a low window. From here, a lady could watch the gardens while holding court of her own. Two fans crossed on her lap might mean we need to speak privately. A slow fan circle in the air. Watch your back. The codes were in the sand endlessly changing. That's how they stayed secret. And not everyone could keep up. There's an infamous case of Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, consort to George III. Rumor has it, one of her ladies attempted to signal an affair using fan gestures, only to be misread, resulting in the accidental exile of a completely innocent duchess. Oops, it didn't help that the duchess in question had a notoriously ambiguous wink. You lift a peacock feather fan from the shelf and admire its shimmer. A tiny tag dangles from the handle, bearing the single word, recall. It's unclear whether it was meant as a reminder, a command, or a sentiment. Probably all three. Welcome to palace life, where clarity is always optional. Historians still argue about how widespread this language of the fan really was. Some claim it was more myth than method. But dig through the diaries of bored noblewomen and you'll find pages devoted to fan etiquette. One even includes illustrations helpfully noting that a fan snapped shut too quickly could be mistaken for offense. Too quickly being defined as anything under 3 seconds. You laugh. That's right. Even their passive aggression was timed. You turn and catch your reflection in a polished silver fan stand. Not a mirror. Exactly. But it does the job. You look like someone caught mid-intrigue. Good. The room grows warmer as you move to the back shelves, where older fans rest frayed, yellowing, forgotten. One is missing most of its feathers, but a small compartment is built into the handle. You pry it open and find a folded slip of parchment. On it, he is watching the wrong woman. Deliciously vague. Someone clearly knew how to write for effect. Near the corner, a small stool is overturned. Its cushion ripped. Could have been a dog, could have been a timber. But it's enough to imagine a scenario. A fan dropped in anger. His stool kicked. His secret spilled. You start to see it everywhere, conflict in the feather fragments, sorrow in the dust. The room seems quiet, but you know better. It buzzes, gently, with old decisions. Decisions made by women who couldn't vote, couldn't own land, but who could tilt a kingdom with the drop of a wrist. You linger by a display case containing fans from other courts, Spanish, French, Venetian, each with its own style of deception. The Spanish fans were heavier, often used as defensive tools. The Venetian ones, gorgeously impractical, meant to dazzle more than deflect. There's even one fan rumored to be poisoned along the tips. A small scratch was enough. Though, of course, that's likely more legend than truth. Probably, you pluck a single feather from the floor. It's swan, soft and curved. A lost piece, part of a larger whole. Like so many women in this palace, its story is incomplete. You look once more at the rows of fans, so many secrets dressed in lace and plumage, hiding sharp truths in a swirl of softness. Then you step back into the hallway, and the fans remain still behind you, poised forever in mid-gesture, like hands raised to speak, but never quite heard. The next room is quieter than the others. Eerily so. You step over the threshold, and the very air feels padded, as if it's been trained not to echo. The tapestries here are heavier, the curtains thicker, the window panes too small to let in more than a sliver of light. Everything is hushed, dimmed, intentional. You've entered the Queen's private withdrawing chamber. Now, don't be fooled by the term withdrawing. It wasn't just where the Queen went to rest. It was where politics crept in disguised as relaxation, where her ladies-in-waiting huddled close to her like bees round a blossom. This room wasn't quiet because it was empty. It was quiet because it was dangerous. You take a few tentative steps forward. The rug beneath your feet is worn smooth in a small oval where a chair must have been dragged back and forth over the years. The chair is gone now, but you can picture it, high-backed, velvet-lined, occupied by a queen who smiled without blinking, while her closest companions danced nervous circles round her. It's often said that kings ruled with swords, but queens ruled with silence. And that silence was rarely hers alone. It was curated, managed, and often manipulated by the ladies who surrounded her daily. The woman who brushed her hair might also be the one feeding her opinions. The one lacing her bodice might be the one tightening her alliances. And that's where you are now, in the very chamber where thoughts were seated, shaped, and sometimes stolen. You stop beside a side table, where a delicate comb still lies between two candle holders. A few pale hairs cling to its teeth. Blonde, maybe, or silver, depends on the candlelight. You remember hearing that Queen Christina of Sweden shaved her head to avoid tedious court beauty rituals. Her ladies were horrified, but then again, Christina wasn't exactly a rule follower. You move toward the hearth. The fire's long dead, but a faint aroma lingers, frankincense, perhaps, or sage. Someone once burned herbs here, likely for clarity, or to drive out fleas, or both. The line between luxury and practicality was always thinner than the silk these women wore. On the mantel above, a hand mirror leans drunkenly against a jar of dried rose petals. Its silver is tarnished, but not forgotten. You catch your reflection again after this time. The room muffles you into something dreamlike. It was in rooms like this that decisions seemed effortless, though hours of manipulation may have preceded them. The lady who fetched the queen's shawl also whispered which ambassador had arrived. The one pouring her tea might just gently mention that the Countess of so-and-so had been seen speaking a little too long with her husband. Just information, just something to know. Historians still debate whether Queen Elizabeth I truly ruled alone, or whether her choices were swayed by the daily buzz of her ladies. Some scholars insist she was too sharp to be manipulated. Others argue quietly, cautiously, that even sharp minds bend when the voice is trusted. You pause beside a writing cabinet with delicate gold filigree. Its drawers are all closed, save one. Inside, a length of thread, wound round a dried seed pod. Or symbolic, possibly both. You've stopped assuming anything is random. You remember Emily Duchatelet, Voltaire's partner and a brilliant physicist in her own right. She navigated court and science with equal deftness. Her letters reveal how often she relied on her ladies-in-waiting not just for grooming or gossip, but for perspective. She once wrote, "Their silence teaches me more than my tutors." Haunting, if you think about it. You find a small stool tucked behind a curtain, a hiding spot, perhaps, or just a place for a servant to wait quietly until summoned. You sit for a moment. The stillness here is thick. The walls aren't just keeping secrets, they're absorbing them. Imagine it. The Queen, brushing her fingertips along the armrest of her chair, listening without seeming to. A lady-in-waiting kneels beside her, murmuring low, slow, soft. Not a plea, a suggestion. Perhaps your Majesty might find the Duchess's visit today unnecessary. And the Queen nods, just once. A Duchess is uninvited, a plan unravels, and no one outside this room ever knows why. You rise and glance toward the door, but something on the floor catches your eye. A faint stain. Wine? Blood? No, too faint. Maybe just spilled ink. You don't want to know. You really don't. One more step, and you find the wall has a thin seam in it, barely noticeable. A secret door, more likely a service panel. But still, you press your hand to it, imagining how many others have done the same. Not all secrets were whispered. Some were exited. You stand at the center of the room now, feeling the pressure of its history settle on your shoulders. The role of the lady-in-waiting wasn't just to serve, or flatter, or laugh at the right moments. It was to shape, to direct, to manage silence. And the Queen, she didn't always speak first. She often listened. And if you controlled what she heard, you controlled everything. You back away slowly, leaving the withdrawing chamber as it was smelling of old roses and unread thoughts. The door closes behind you, and the hush resumes. A silence that has teeth. The next room feels different the moment you enter. The air is cooler, heavier, scented with dried herbs and a faint trace of vinegar. The walls are lined not with tapestries or bookshelves, but with cabinets, some glass-fronted, some latched tight. There's a table in the center of the room, covered in cloths, mortar and pestles, pewter basins, and a cracked ceramic jug. You're standing in a sick room, or, more precisely, a healing chamber. Though healing, as you'll soon see, wasn't always the priority. This was where ladies-in-waiting truly got close physically, emotionally, politically. For when a noble or royal fell ill, it was rarely doctors who were called first. It was the women. Women who knew the household remedies, who could brew willow bark for fevers or mash rose petals for burns. And, crucially, women who could whisper in the ear of the bedridden with no one else round to hear. You drift toward the table and run your fingers along a strip of linen bandage, now yellowed with age. Still faintly stained, not with blood, something darker, murkier. A potion, a poultice, maybe both. It's easy to forget how close medicine once danced with mystery. A small glass bottle catches your eye. The label, barely legible, reads, "Tinct of valerian, a common calming agent in the era, but also conveniently used to induce sleep in talkative patients." You wonder how many secrets were whispered in this room, then conveniently forgotten by morning. One of the cabinets is slightly ajar. Inside, bundles of dried herbs, lavender, thyme, feverfew, and... is that belladonna? Ah yes, belladonna, elegant name, highly toxic, used to dilate the pupils and, occasionally, end marriages. Accidentally, of course. Historians still argue about whether certain noble women practiced what we'd now call soft poisoning. Not to kill heavens, no, but to weaken, to delay, to make someone just unwell enough that they missed a vital conversation or a court appearance. A subtle absence could change the course of everything. It was, in essence, scheduling warfare. You turn toward the small cot in the corner. It's neatly made, but one pillow bears the clear imprint of a head. Not recently, just persistently. Someone used to lie there for hours at a time, perhaps pretending to sleep while listening to the muttered debates on whether she was improving. You can picture it now. A noble woman wrapped in embroidered blankets, eyes half-lidded, while her ladies hover. One feeds her soup, one dabs her brow, and one is sitting a little too close, murmuring that she really ought to speak with the Queen about Lady X's suspicious absence from morning prayer. It was bedside manipulation, served with broth and gentle pats. You reach for a small ceramic bowl resting near the fireplace. Dried residue lines the rim, smells faintly of mint, vinegar, and burnt sugar. You're reminded of Lucretia Borgia, though hers is a name that often sends historians into debate spirals. Was she really the poison a legend suggests, or simply the scapegoat for her family's notoriety? Either way, her ladies were known to carry tinctures in their sleeves, some medicinal, others, let's say, speculative. A chair beside the court is worn smooth on the arms. Someone sat there often, perhaps a favorite lady-in-waiting, the one always trusted to deliver the nighttime dose, or the one the patient asked for when she wanted to confide in a moment of vulnerability. This was the advantage of being the healer. You saw people at their weakest. You knew which fears kept them up at night. And best of all, no one questioned your presence. If anything, they welcomed it. You return to the cabinets, where rows of bottles sit in neat rows. You recognize some ingredients: cinnamon, myrrh, camphor. Others are unfamiliar, labeled in Latin or French shorthand. One has no label at all. That's always reassuring. A silver spoon rests beside the basin. Not elegant, but practical. Possibly used to measure out doses. Possibly used to test someone's willpower. A spoonful too many, and the truth pours out. Or the breathing stops, depending. There's a drawer built into the underside of the table. You slide it open. Inside, scraps of paper, covered in shaky handwriting. One note simply reads, "To pale today." Voice fading, send word. Another says, "Refuses meat." Dreams of bells, chilling, yes, but hauntingly poetic. And then one that stops you. She said it again. "Do not trust the one who warms my hands." You fold it quietly and set it back. This room wasn't all plotting and poison. It was also where genuine care lived. Not every lady-in-waiting had ulterior motives. Some truly loved the queens and nobles they served. Some wept when they died. Some died themselves, never named in the histories, but mourned in silence by the few who knew their worth. But even love, in this world, could be used. You sit briefly in the healer's chair. Look round. Every item here has dual meaning. A bowl is both for soup and tincture. A smile is both comfort and assessment. Even the soft cloths could be wrung to silence a gasp. You rise slowly. The bed remains still. The room exhales. And once again, you return to the corridor where no one will ever know what was said in that quiet hour between illness and influence. The hallway darkens as you walk on. The sconces fewer, the silence heavier. You find yourself pausing before the next door, not from fear exactly, but from caution, the kind that settles into your spine without asking. You push it open slowly. Inside is a servant's room, or it would have been, if not for the finer touches. A candle still sits on the windowsill. The bed is narrow, but neatly made, and a pair of slippers worn nearly through rests at its foot. A cracked mirror hangs above the wash basin, and beside it, pinned with a simple hairpin, is a small square of parchment with a single word, hush. You're in the room of the maid who knew too much. Ladies-in-waiting may have held influence, but they weren't the only ones listening. The quiet, background figure of the dressers, the footfalls of girls who fetched, mended, and waited in shadows, they heard everything. And sometimes, they understood more than they let on. This room once belonged to one of them, a maid who probably didn't have a family name anyone bothered to write down. She wasn't at the feasts, she wasn't painted in portraits, but she was there, just behind the curtain, picking up the threads. You move toward the small desk. It's barely larger than a tray. A few scattered buttons, a needle still threaded, and beneath a folded cloth, a torn fragment of paper. The edge is jagged, the ink is faded. You hold it up and read. He does not see her, only her shadow. Poetry, a note to herself, a copied phrase from a conversation she shouldn't have overheard. Historians still argue whether low-born servants ever kept diaries in the Tudor or Bourbon courts. Some dismiss the idea as romantic nonsense. Others point to the occasional recovered fragment line scribbled in margins, notes found tucked in unused fireplaces, whispers scrawled between stitches. You run your hand over the wooden surface of the desk. Scratched into it is a crude drawing to figures, side by side, with a third hovering nearby. One figure is marked with a crown. The others are nameless. The maid's name might have been Alice, or Bridget, or Martha. You'll never know. But what you do know is that she was listening. Always. She probably knew which noblewoman was sneaking off after dusk. Knew who argued too loudly behind their doors. Knew when the queen cried and when she pretended to cry. And perhaps she knew one secret to many. You sit briefly on the edge of the bed. It doesn't creak. It sighs. There's a small box tucked beneath the cot. You pull it out. Inside are bundles of thread, a faded ribbon, a scrap of lace, and a pendant. Nothing royal, just a simple carved locket. You open it gently. Inside, a painted eye. Just the eye. These were popular ones. Lovers' eyes, they were called. People wore them to keep the gaze of someone precious close to the heart. Whoever this maid loved, if she ever did, they saw her. And like everyone else, you place it back carefully. This wasn't just a room. It was her fortress. Her world, shrunk down to a few square feet. But a sharp mind can stretch far beyond its borders. There's a pillow at the window ledge, stitched with a clumsy hand, but clear intention. It's flattened into shape or perch for a sitting. Watching the garden below, you walk over and sit. From here, you can see the far end of the palace yard, the edge of the stables, and the south gate. Not much, but enough to know who arrived late, and who didn't return at all. And maybe that's how it ended for her. One day, she saw something she shouldn't have, or she repeated something whispered in the dark. Or maybe, just maybe, she said nothing at all, but someone thought she had. In those times, that was enough. There's no record of her fate, but a thin note, folded behind the windowsill, survives. You ease it free and unfold it. If I vanish, it was not by choice. Your throat tightens. You fold it back, not because you want to forget, but because you feel like she asked you to remember. Quietly, carefully. You rise, one last glance round this simple room, and then you leave, stepping back into the stone corridor, knowing that somewhere between the queen's velvet chair and the scullery, a girl once balanced history on the edge of her tongue, and let it fall in silence. The corridor tilts gently now, descending down a slope too subtle for the eye, but your feet know it. The chill rises, and with it comes a flicker of torchlight on the wall, a sign of something more theatrical ahead. You follow it to a grand, arched doorway, and like the smaller rooms you've passed, this one boasts double doors, now slightly ajar. Beyond them, a world of gold and velvet pulses in the low light. You found the masquerade room, or rather, one of them. These hidden chambers were set aside for masked balls, late-night assignations, and encounters that straddle the fine line between public performance and private manipulation. And the ladies in waiting? Oh, they were masters of both. You step into the space and immediately feel it. The energy of something that was always almost forbidden. The air carries the remnants of perfume, sweat, wine, and wax, a heady blend of memory. The ceiling arches high above in dark beams, lost to shadow, while the floor beneath your feet is polished to an almost reflective gleam. No chandeliers here, only candelabras, their flames flickering like the end of a secret. On the far table, you spot what you expected: masks, dozens of them, feathers, sequins, beading, grotesque noses, delicate lace veils, each one carefully designed to obscure just enough of a face to tempt, but not so much to mislead the right eyes. Ladies in waiting often wore their most honest expressions only behind a mask. You pick one up, black velvet, stiff with gold trim. It still smells faintly of lilac and clove. Inside, the name is stitched in silk thread. A common combination, sure. But the mind leaps Elizabeth Regina, a loyal servant, a scheming noblewoman, or someone playing all three at once. The masquerade was a place of transformation. A duchess could become a peasant. A queen could flirt like a commoner, and a maid could pretend she was untouchable, if only for a night. But of course, even fantasies have rules. There's a small platform at one end of the room, a space for music, most likely. From here, the lutes and viols would sing while couples glided and spun. Or rather, plotted and positioned, because every turn in the dance could lead to a whispered offer, a sideways glance, a promise made in jest that somehow ended up binding. You walk among the scattered benches, finding gloves tucked between the cushions, a discarded ribbon, and near the wall a slipper, delicate and pointed, the heel broken. A classic clue: someone left too quickly, or too angrily, or never meant to leave at all. It reminds you of the story of Gabrielle d'Estrées, mistress to King Henry IV of France. She once attended a masked ball dressed as a shepherdess, only to be recognized by a rival courtier thanks to the way she held her wineglass. The scandal that followed was less about her presence and more about who knew she was there. That's always the trick. Not just what you do, but who sees it. Historians still argue whether masked balls were truly anonymous. After all, the court was a small world. Everyone knew everyone's perfume, but masks gave them plausible deniability, and sometimes that was all they needed. A secret rendezvous, just a dance, a whispered threat, merely a flirtation. You reach a side alcove and find a writing table tucked into the shadows. Odd for a ballroom, unless someone needed to send a note during the dance. You slide open the drawer. Inside, a folded card, blank on the front. You open it. He wore her color. She noticed. That's it. You sit for a moment, the card in your lap. Was it the start of something, or the end? Here, everything floated in ambiguity. A fan dropped in the wrong corner might mean nothing, or everything. You rise and move toward the balcony, an inner one, overlooking the dance floor. The view is perfect for an observer, or a queen too tired to dance. Perhaps one of the ladies in waiting sat here with a notebook, tracking who danced with whom, who avoided eye contact, who lingered at the refreshments too long. Because make no mistake, this room wasn't about fun. It was about performance, strategic flirtation, timed exits, and beneath every gilded mask, a face calculating what it would all mean by morning. The candlelight flickers as you pass. One mask on the wall catches your attention. It's shaped like a fox, the eyes ringed with red velvet. A fox was always a dangerous choice. Clever, sly, to wear. You imagine a lady in waiting wearing it, laughing too loudly, dancing too close to someone she shouldn't. And you wonder, did she survive the night? You turn to go, but pause at the door. One last glance at the golden room behind you. The air still hums with music no longer played. The floor remembers the footsteps. The masks remember the breath. And somewhere in the dark, a secret still waltzes slowly toward the edge of being known. You leave the masquerade behind, its golden silence still clinging to your sleeves, and follow a narrow passage deeper into the heart of the palace. The walls here grew plain again, stripped of ornament, as if even the architecture knows it's time to be serious. You round a corner and step into a room thick with expectation and candle smoke. This is the birthing chamber. Yes, this is where new life began and where the lives of many ladies in waiting took sharp turns, upward or downward, based on nothing more than timing, alliances and bloodlines. The room is warm, stifling almost, and the heavy curtains are drawn tight, keeping the rest of the court firmly on the outside. A low bed dominates the space, flanked by stools, linens, and basins, some gleaming with polish, others stained by time. You can still smell lavender water, rosemary, the coppery trace of memory. Someone, long ago, gave birth here, or didn't. This wasn't just a place of motherhood. It was a theater of legitimacy. The ladies in waiting who served in this space weren't merely hand-holders. They were witnesses. They verified the baby's arrival, the mother's cries, the silence or sobs that follow. In some courts, their testimony was all that stood between a royal child and accusations of imposture or illegitimacy. One of the most infamous cases, the birth of James II's son in 1688. Rumors exploded that the infant, later known as the Old Pretender, wasn't the Queen's child at all, but a smuggled impostor, passed in through a warming pan. Absurd, maybe, but ladies in waiting were questioned, grilled, even threatened, because they had been there, or should have been. Historians still argue about whether such a swap could have happened. Most say no, but those few murmurs that insist it might have, they always mention one woman, a lady in waiting who disappeared shortly after the birth. No record, no letters, just gone. You walk slowly around the bed, where soft pillows still sag toward the center. There's an embroidered cushion on the floor, forgotten, flattened, likely a kneeling pad, maybe for prayer, maybe for pleading. On the wall hangs a small icon, a painted Madonna and child, the gold leaf flaking at the edges. She watches you silently, arms full, I said. You sit for a moment in the corner chair. It creaks beneath you sympathetically. A battered writing slate sits nearby. On it, a name, half erased. There was more than one kind of labor in this room. Physical, yes, but also social. A successful birth could raise a lady in waiting to prominence. A royal godmother position, a new set of rooms, closer access to the Queen. But a complicated birth, a stillborn child, a whispered accusation of interference, that could mean disgrace, exile, or worse, a silent banishment where your name wasn't even whispered again. You open a chest near the wall. Inside, folded linens, many clean, some not. Tucked beneath them, a pair of baby booties, hand-stitched, soft, never worn. You close the chest. There's a second door here, one not used by nobles. A servant's entrance. Through it, midwives would have come and gone, perhaps even wet nurses. But always, the ladies in waiting stood close to the Queen, holding her hand, holding her gaze, and holding the line between public knowledge and private agony. You recall the case of Marie Antoinette, whose first pregnancy was watched like a royal sport. When she went into labor, the room filled with people. Observers, nobles, witnesses. She fainted. She gave birth on the floor. Her ladies, overwhelmed, wept behind curtains while the queen screamed. And afterward, one of them lost favor because she couldn't handle the pressure. You touch the edge of the bed once more. It feels colder now. Or perhaps it's just the weight of everything that happened here. A lady in waiting once stood here, pressing a cloth to the queen's forehead, whispering, "Almost there," while another stood by the door, arms out, waiting to receive the child, and a third, writing it all down. Birth here wasn't just biological, it was political theater. Sometimes children were born, sometimes hopes, sometimes neither. You rise and move toward the window. It's small, high up, a view only of the sky. Perhaps that was the point, nothing but heaven to witness the moments no one else was allowed to see. Before you leave, you spot a note tucked beneath the mattress. The paper is thin, the ink careful. She cried before the baby, and after, not for him. You fold it, place it back. Some things are too intimate even for history. You walk out of the room slowly, letting the door settle behind you with the quietest of clicks. And in the silence, you hear the echo of a baby's cry. Or maybe it's just the wind. The air shifts as you step through the next doorway, darker, cooler, and carrying the unmistakable scent of incense. You've arrived in the private chapel, or what's left of it. The stone walls flicker with candlelight, casting soft halos over statues once smoothed by centuries of fingers brushing against marble in whispered prayer. But don't be fooled. This wasn't just a place for piety. For the ladies in waiting, the chapel was both sanctuary and stage. A place to weep convincingly, to kneel conspicuously, and, when the timing was right, to pass a vial or a glance that changed everything. You move down the central aisle between two rows of wooden benches. They're slightly uneven, worn thin at the center by generations of careful kneeling. You brush your fingers along the back of one. The wood is warm, or maybe that's just you. At the front of the chapel, the altar looms simple, yet imposing. A crucifix above, a tapestry behind, and beneath it all is stone ledge where small offerings once rested. Dried flowers, copper corns, perhaps the occasional confession folded too tightly to reopen. To the right is a small alcove, a kind of devotional nook. It was likely used for private prayer, but the scorch marks on the nearby floor suggest something more ritualistic. Maybe someone once burned more than just incense here. On a nearby bench, you spot a book, Psalterium Sancte Reginae, the Queen's Psalter, bound in leather, the spine cracked with use. It lies open to a psalm about mercy, or guilt, depends on how you read it. Ladies in waiting were expected to be devout, or at least look devout. The chapel was one of the few places they could go without question. But just because you were kneeling didn't mean you weren't scheming. After all, even the saints have shadows. You recall the legend of La Voisin, the infamous French poisoner tied to the court of Louis XIV. Though not a lady in waiting herself, she provided many of them with powders and potions, some for love, others for escape. Some of her clients were said to attend mass immediately after receiving their deadly packages. Just in case God was watching, historians still argue about how involved the court's ladies were in these dark arts. Some claim it was all exaggerated by their enemies. Others say the chapel was used not only for prayer, but for cover. A vial passed behind a psalter, a letter hidden in a hymnal, a whispered warning disguised as a blessing. You step behind the altar and notice something carved into the stone ledge. A set of initials, almost completely eroded, followed by a date, 1543. Beneath it, a single word, Miseria, Latin for have mercy, or a coded request to stop whatever plan was already in motion. To your left is a confessional box, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the wood is dark, polished smooth by desperation. The seat sags just a little. Someone once spent a long time here, either spilling a soul or listening to one unravel. Imagine it, a lady-in-waiting kneels, whispering not just her sins, but her fears. That she knows too much, that she suspects something, that she helped someone escape or enter a room they never should have touched. And the priest, he offers absolution, or silence, or sometimes betrayal. You walk past the votive candles. Most are lit, but one burns low, its wax pooled like a sigh. A slip of paper lies beside it. Unfolded, it reads, "I saw her hands. They shook. That's it. No name, no context, just trembling hands. Hands that may have held a rosary, or a bottle, or a knife." You move to the small cabinet near the back of the chapel. Inside, candlesticks, faded prayer cards, and curiously a stoppered vial. You lift it. It's empty, but the scent clings to the glass. Bitter almond. You pause. That's not incense. It could be poison, or perfume, or something that pretended to be one but worked like the other. This was the terrible beauty of a lady-in-waiting's world. Everything could be sacred or suspect. A prayer for forgiveness might also be a prayer that no one finds out. You sit briefly on the rear bench. The view from here offers a different perspective, one that includes every candle, every gesture, every shadow cast by the tall, cloaked figures that once knelt in devotion or deception. There was power here, quiet, terrifying power, to damn or redeem, to cover or expose. And if a lady-in-waiting played her cards right, she could leave this chapel forgiven and stronger than she entered. Or she could leave it for the last time, her sins sealed beneath stone. You rise quietly. As you exit, you catch your reflection again in the metal of the candle snuffer. Brief, warped, but enough to remind you, even in places of supposed purity, nothing was ever truly unobserved. The door swings shut behind you with a sigh, and the chapel, like its secrets, goes still. The corridor beyond the chapel grows warmer, as if you've stepped back into the breathing heart of the palace. You follow the curve of the hall until it opens into a cozy chamber, its hearth still holding the ghost of a long-dead fire. This is a place of evening, a gathering room, a sitting room, a space for loose hair and looser tongues. The ladies-in-waiting would gather here after formal duties had ended for the day. Cassettes loosened, shoes slipped off, posture softened, and with the hush of formality lifted, confessions began to bubble up like tea set to boil. You walk across the faded rug to a pair of armchairs, each worn into the shape of someone who sat too often and for too long. Between them, a small table, upon which sits a pewter tray with the remains of a teapot and two delicate cups. The dregs inside are black as secrets. A third chair sits nearby, lower to the ground. A stool for a maid, or maybe the preferred perch of the listener. Every group of ladies had one, the quiet one who remembered everything. This was the realm of fireside confessions. And if you think secrets stopped once the gowns came off and the hearth warmed the room, you haven't been paying attention. This was often when truths began to surface. You walk toward the hearth. Above it hangs a faded painting, just a still life of flowers. Harmless, yes, until you notice the thorny vine curling round the edge of the frame. Unusual, intentional, maybe. Everything in this palace has a double meaning. You sit, easing into one of the chairs. It sighs as if it too is grateful for your weight. The fabric smells faintly of lavender and something sweeter, sharper, a wine spill. Perhaps from a night when someone shared too much. There are coals in the hearth, long extinguished but not yet swept. You imagine the women sitting here, feet tucked under skirts, voices low. One leans in too close, another laughs too loud, and one sips her tea slowly while her eyes track the others like a cat watching birds. They called it chamber games. Not charades, not cards, but whispered hypotheticals. What would you do if the Queen's lover wrote to you? Would you tell if someone confessed to hiding a letter? Would you rather be exiled with gold, or die adored and penniless? That sort of thing. And then someone, eventually, would see something real. I saw her. She wasn't alone. He kissed her hand and forgot she wasn't the queen. I touched the seal. It was already broken, and once the fire crackled over those confessions, there was no taking them back. You glanced to the wall where a small shelf holds an assortment of trinkets, ivory combs, folded notes, even a tiny wooden box carved. You open it. Inside, a single braid of hair, tied in a green ribbon. Not labeled, not explained. You close it gently. Whatever it meant, it mattered. You recall the story of Sarah Churchill, close friend and lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Great Britain. Their friendship began with letters and ended in scandal. Sarah knew too much, said too much, and eventually published everything. The Queen never spoke to her again, but history never forgot her. Historians still debate whether Sarah's downfall began in the throne room or by the fire. In some small chamber like this, where the wrong word was, you rise and inspect the mantle. Scratched faintly into the stone are letters. Initials, a code, you can't be sure, but beneath them is a circle carved deliberately, deeply. A gay mark, a token spot. Maybe something only this small circle of women understood. The window here is small and round, offering a view of the courtyard's north side. From here, one could watch who left early, who stayed late, who lingered at someone else's door. And maybe that's why this room was so dangerous. It was informal, yes, but never unwitnessed. You return to the tray. One of the teacups has a chip in the rim, faint lipstick still clinging near the crack. She must have sipped gently, or with great urgency. Either way, someone else noticed. Someone always does. A drawer beneath the side table yields a folded page. The ink is smudged, the message incomplete, but one line reads clearly. She thinks the fire makes her safe. It only makes her speak. You place it back. Some truths are already burned. You pause once more by the hearth, running your hand over the stonework. It's warm still, not from flame, but from memory. These women were firelight confessors, courtly survivors, emotional strategists. They told the truth. Sometimes, other times, they let it unravel slowly, until it couldn't be traced back to them. You step quietly from the room, the echo of their laughter still clinging to the rug. Behind you, the last coal crumbles. The hallway seems quieter now, like it knows you're getting close to the heart of something. You follow its curve to a smaller, more ornate door. It's painted soft blue, its brass handle polished by countless careful hands. You push it open and step into a room where exile could begin with the clink of porcelain. This is the tea chamber, or, more accurately, the decision room. Because while the throne room decided battles and borders, this cozy, sun-drenched space with its lace-curtained windows and dainty chinaware decided fates. At first glance, it's lovely. A round table with a linen cloth, 4 chairs, and a painted cabinet filled with delicate cups, saucers, and gleaming silver spoons. A sugar bowl sits uncovered. A teapot rests on a warmer. You wouldn't suspect a thing, but you should, because a misplaced cup in this room could mean the end of your courtly life. You step to the table, examining the set. One cup bears a chip on the rim, another is pristine. A third has a faint crack running down its side, expertly repaired with gold lacquer in the Japanese kintsugi style. Beautiful, and yet an omen. You imagine the ladies in waiting gathering here with the queen or one of her most trusted companions. Not all at once. This room was for pairs. Trios, at most. It was where you were summoned for a word, or where you dropped by uninvited, hoping for favor. And then came the tea. Not just a drink, a test. If your cup was filled, first, good sign. If it was filled, less so. If it wasn't filled at all, well, you wouldn't be attending next week's feast. Some historians laugh at this, calling it overanalysis. But court etiquette books from the 1600s and 1700s are obsessed with tea service. The order, the eye contact, the weight of silence between sips. Everything was watched, catalogued, weaponized. You reach toward the sugar tongs, delicate, silver, engraved with a tiny bee. You lift them and notice a small folded piece of paper beneath the sugar bowl. You open it. Don't drink. She changed her mind. Chilling, immediate, real. You glance at the cracked teacup again. Who drank from it? Did they regret it? Or were they just slow to lift the saucer? Already too late. You think of Caroline of Ansbach, wife of George II, and the tightrope her ladies walked. 1. Henrietta Howard was both lady-in-waiting and the king's mistress. Imagine the tension over a simple tea-time exchange, pouring tea for the queen, then for the man who shared your bed, then pretending it meant nothing. You can bet Henrietta watched every hand twitch, every sip. The cabinet near the wall holds more than cups. You open it and find a box of old napkins, some still faintly stained. Underneath, a bundle of notes tied with silkstring. You lift them gently. Each one begins with "my dear friend," but the tone shifts. Some are warm, others icy. One simply says, "I agreed," then thought better. Exile could come in many forms. A formal dismissal, a sudden reassignment to a country estate, or the worst, social coldness. You'd show up to a gathering and find your chair missing. Your name not called. Your presence politely ignored. And often, the first warning came in this room, over tea. You sit down at the table, imagining it all, the lady arriving in good spirits, unaware that a complaint has been lodged against her, a letter intercepted, a word misspoken, and now the queen stirs her tea 3 times before speaking. Her companion's smile tightens, and the cup your cup sits, still empty. You wait, they say nothing. You excuse yourself, and you're never quite in again. You glance at the window, one of the few that looks directly onto the inner courtyard, a place where dismissed ladies once waited for their carriage. Some stood tall, some cried. One, reportedly, sang a hymn under her breath as she walked away. A final performance. Back at the table, the tea's long gone cold. You lift the gold-lacquered cup. It's heavier than it looks, stronger than it should be. A message, maybe, that what breaks doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it's repaired, made more obvious, more dangerous. You set it down gently. Tea was ritual, yes, but also theater. And the best actresses always drank slowly. You rise from the table and look round once more. Nothing extravagant here, just porcelain, sugar, and the memory of decisions. But you know the truth now. Sometimes, a kingdom didn't fall from war. It spilled from a chipped cup. The corridor beyond the tea chamber is darker, narrow as if reluctant to let you leave. You follow it silently until it opens into one last room, half lit by high windows and draped in the scent of dust and perfume. You've returned to the beginning, though perhaps you didn't realize it. This is the tapestry room, and though it appears empty, it is anything but. You step inside and hear it, the hush of heavy fabric swaying, ever so gently, in a draft you can't quite place. These wall-hung tapestries were not just for decoration. They were insulation for secrets, protection for whispers, witnesses to the women who passed through these halls with smiles that meant everything and nothing. You walk slowly along the wall, fingers brushing the embroidered wool. One scene shows a hunter falcon poised on a lady's wrist, her eyes sharp beneath a woven veil. Another shows a garden, lush and blooming, where a woman places a rose in another's. And behind each of these scenes, a silence thick with meaning. It was here, in this chamber of threads, that ladies in waiting often met in the early hours, too late for a gossip, too early for duty. The tapestry room was neutral ground. No assignments here, no direct service, just breath between chapters, unless, of course, someone used it for something more. You pause before one panel, a scene of court musicians. But in the background, barely noticeable, a woman holds a letter behind her back. Clever, deliberate, a nod from the weaver, perhaps. or from history itself. This room wasn't just soft fabric and shadow. It was a living memory. You settle onto a window seat, its velvet cushion threadbare and sun-bleached. From here, a woman could watch the door, listen, speak softly, say the things she wouldn't dare voice elsewhere. Perhaps she confessed a fear here. She knows I lied. Or a betrayal. He told me I was the only one. Or worse, I think I believe her. Ladies in waiting weren't just noble women with good posture. They were archivists of emotion, observers of power, custodians of grief. And here, between the fibers, those truths clung. You think of Elizabeth Throckmorton, lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth I, who secretly married the Queen's favorite, Sir Walter Raleigh. She hid her pregnancy for months. When the truth came out, imprisonment, not for the crime itself, but for keeping the Queen out of the secret. In that court, privacy was betrayal. Historians still debate where Elizabeth hid during her pregnancy. Some suspect it was a servant's room. Others, the tapestry chamber, tucked behind these thick, muffling walls. No cry would carry. You rise and move toward the corner, where one tapestry is slightly loose at the edge. You slip behind it. A hollow, a hidden niche, no more than 3 feet wide. Shelves line one side, old, brittle shoes, a book with no title, and on the back wall, scratched with something sharp, a phrase, "Still listening." You step back out and let the fabric fall closed. The room feels colder now, because it knows you know. A final tapestry depicts a banquet scene. Everyone is smiling, goblets raised, dresses gleaming, and in the shadows beneath the table, a single face watches, not part of the feast, but present, a witness, perhaps, that was the artist's final joke, or the truth. You walk to the center of the room and turn slowly, letting the fabric round you rustle faintly in a breeze that no longer blows. The ladies in waiting are gone now, but their footsteps are still in the stone, their whispers still in the thread, their truths still listening. So now, you sit quietly, breath soft, body heavy. The journey has slowed. The corridors are behind you. The doors have all closed with a hush that feels final but not frightening. The tapestries don't move anymore. The candles are burned low. The velvet is cool beneath your touch. And the ladies in waiting, they vanished into history, not lost, not erased. Just quieter now, asleep, perhaps in the corners of memory. Still smiling behind fans, still whispering behind doors, still tending queens, even in dreams. Maybe you hear them still, the soft pad of slippers across stone, the sigh of fabric as secrets were passed in silence. Or maybe it's only the gentle hum of your fan, the dim light of your room, the way your own breath mirrors the rhythm of long-forgotten lives. You are safe, you are warm, and the walls, no longer watching, simply hold you. So let go now. Let the palace fade. Let the tapestries blur. Let the quiet settle into your chest. Sleep knows the way out, and the ladies, they'll still be whispering when you wake.